Hey y'all, it's Lola the manager, your new favorite project manager, tech junkie, and entrepreneur. Welcome back to season 2 of Life as a Project Manager. We've covered terminology and organization, and today I'm sharing another reality check. I've been hired as a Scrum Master multiple times, and let me tell you, what companies say they want and what they actually need are two completely different things. Today, I'm breaking down what Scrum methodology actually says a Scrum Master should do versus what I was actually doing in those roles. This story might sound familiar if you've ever been in a similar situation. So with that said, let's get into it. Y'all should know by now, I love a good story time. But before I get into my experiences, let me explain what a Scrum Master is and the key ceremonies for anyone who might not be familiar. I always want to make sure we're on the same page. Y'all know, it's the educator in me. A Scrum Master is a servant leader who facilitates the Scrum process and removes impediments for the development team. They're not project managers. They don't manage timelines, budgets, or assign tasks. They're coaches and facilitators. The key Scrum ceremonies include daily stand-ups, or known as a Scrum, where the team shares what they did yesterday, what they're doing today, and any blockers/impediments that they may be facing. They also have sprint planning, where the team decides what work to commit to for the upcoming sprint. Sprint reviews is where they're going to demo or test the completed work in that sprint with the stakeholders. And the retrospectives, that's where that team reflects on what went well and what could be improved. In proper Scrum, you also have a product owner who manages the product backlog and makes decisions on what gets built, and a development team that's self-organizing and does the actual work. The Scrum Master supports this process but doesn't control it. Now that we have a baseline understanding of what Scrum is, we can get on to the story time. So boom, I get hired by this EdTech company that focused on giving college students workforce experience in STEM fields. Their model was interesting. Students were placed in teams or groups and assigned real companies in STEM fields. What does that mean? That means that the real companies, the real clients that these students work with could be someone like Mayo Clinic, Uber, Zillow, Raytheon, you name it. These were actual companies that the students were working with. And in these teams, they'd work on actual challenges for those companies. Let's say Mayo Clinic is the client, and a challenge that they have for one team is to develop some type of dashboard or platform that allows their research development team to input information here that can automatically run a report and show us some nice data. That's just an example. Another opportunity would be Zillow, whose challenge is for the students to help them come up with a updated feature on their app or their website that allows people to find houses quicker, which allows them to then view the property sooner and then potentially make an offer quicker. You get what I'm saying? When I say in different STEM fields, these companies fall within the STEM field, and the students may be doing something technical for that company, or maybe something that deals with science or engineering or whatever the case is. It all depends on what type of challenge the companies want the students to complete. Each team of students was managed by a project manager. That was supposed to be my role. The first 2 weeks were all about training, right? They wanted to make sure that the PMs and the students were trained in the design sprint process. Plus, they wanted them to get exposure and experience with technical software such as Miro and Figma. This all seemed legitimate and aligned with what I expected. But here's where it got weird. My job title was project manager, but they really wanted me to function as a Scrum Master. So the students were essentially the development team, the people that actually have to do the work. They were designing and building data visualization boards and mobile app website prototypes, you name it. And my job was to attend the meetings and coach my team through the process. But here's the thing. I wasn't in charge of a traditional timeline. Instead, I was giving them tips and tools on how to track the time it takes to complete their task so we could better prepare for testing at the end of our sprint. Almost like they wanted me to create these burn down charts or to assess the team's velocity. I was scheduling all the Scrum ceremonies, but I almost never spoke during them. My job was just to ensure that we're following the Scrum process. But here's the catch. We didn't have a product owner per se. There wasn't really a backlog or someone to own a backlog because there was kind of a product. But let me just preface this. I understand that this is pretty much like an internship experience for the students, but there should already be a process and standard in how the organization functions. And then you teach the students how to navigate that, how to become part of that process. Creating this makeshift type of Scrum experience, but calling it Scrum kind of takes away from the truth of what Scrum is. And so since there wasn't any really essential Scrum components outside of like, we had the ceremonies, but we didn't have all of them. And then I'm scheduling them and they're not actually functioning the way they are. It was almost like, I don't want to say a glorified babysitter, but that's the game that it was. Feel me? It was just weird. It was just very weird. And so I'm improvising in real time because the process that I immediately understood when you said, oh, you're going to be a project manager. But then when you had me get into the room and say, actually, you're kind of more like a Scrum Master, but then you're trying to make me blend two worlds, which isn't an issue. Every company kind of moves how they want to. But you said one thing and then we end up doing another. And it just became a lot real fast. Then I took another role as an IT project manager. This was at a different EdTech company. And I encountered the same blurred lines, but from a different angle. I was assigned 3 enterprise platforms: Salesforce, Microsoft, and Workday. And I was responsible for all platform development for them. When internal departments wanted new features, integrations, or modifications, they'd submit their requests through the product and project team for approval. And then once approved, then those requests came to me in my queue for whichever specific platform that it fell in. Now, my job, as I understood it, was tracking the business case, budget, timeline, proving timesheets for the team, and just managing tasks and status reports within ServiceNow. Very traditional project management responsibility, to say the least. But here's where the twist is. The developer and business analysts ran the sprints, ran the daily scrums, sprint planning, sprint reviews, and retrospectives. I was just there as a fly on the wall. There was no real timeline in the traditional PM sense, but I was also responsible for the time. And I'm not talking about timesheets. I'm talking about the time that we spending on this development. And apparently before I got there, they used to have dedicated Scrum Masters, but they let them all go. Now we have this weird situation where there was a functional manager who managed the developers, and he and I would alternate being Scrum Master-ish because we were slightly confused about who should be actually filling that role. So we would work together to tackle impediments because that's what made sense for what we had going on in our team. So we just divided and conquered whatever the team brought up. For instance, when the business analyst was struggling to get information from stakeholders because they weren't being invited to the sprint planning and all communications was happening through a long email thread, I had to address that. Because what do you mean you're going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for weeks via email when we really could have just had it all hashed out in a sprint planning meeting? Or when our developer said he was going to be out for 2 weeks, the functional manager, he's the one that was able to address that situation since he was the functional manager of the developers. It was like having 2 part-time Scrum Masters instead of 1 dedicated person, and we were making it up as we went along. In sidebar, the business analyst was actually functioning as a proxy product owner, which does not make any sense. So when I say at this company, they had the elements of Scrum, but just couldn't quite get it together, I truly mean it, because there's no way someone from your development team is the product owner. Granted, might be possible, but in this instance, it wasn't. So she didn't own the software. She didn't own the product, i.e. Workday. That was the product example that I'm giving of. It's all a mess. It was all a mess. And I'm no longer there. Now, even though I felt that I was on the wildest roller coaster ride at those 2 different companies, I understand why companies create these hybrid situations. And it comes down to several factors. First, in educational settings, like my first EdTech company, they were trying to give students real world experience with Agile methodology. But students aren't professional developers. At least those students weren't. They needed more guidance and structure than traditional Scrum accounts for. They needed adult oversight and coaching that doesn't exist in a typical Scrum framework. Second, companies are cutting costs by eliminating dedicated Scrum Masters, but still wanting the benefits of Agile development. So they push those responsibilities onto existing project managers, creating this dual role where you're doing traditional PM oversight while the team is working in sprints. That's exactly what happened in my second EdTech role. Third, during Agile transformations, companies want the speed and flexibility of Agile with the certainty and control of waterfall project management. They hear that Agile improves productivity and team satisfaction, so they want to adopt these practices, but they're not willing to give up the control and predictability that traditional project management provides. So they create these hybrid roles that try to get the best of both worlds, but often get the worst of both. You end up with Scrum ceremonies that feel like theater, going through the motions without embracing the underlying principle. Companies want Agile benefits without committing to the autonomy and structural changes that true Agile requires. Now, the confusion about my role created challenges with the development teams too. In true Scrum, the team is self-organized and the Scrum Master supports their autonomy. But because I was also responsible for project deliverables and timelines, I had to push back when the team wanted to pivot or reprioritize. The developers would come to me with blockers, which is perfect for a Scrum Master. But then leadership expected me to solve these blockers immediately and report on the impact to project timeline. I became the middleman between Agile team practices and traditional project management reporting. It was like being asked to be a coach and a referee at the same time. Those roles have fundamentally different objectives, and trying to do both created tension with everyone. Another company, same pattern. About 2 years ago, I had an interview experience that perfectly illustrates this pattern. I applied for a role that was listed as project manager. Straightforward, right? But during the interview, I learned it was actually a blend of both worlds. The hiring manager said they wanted someone to lead our Agile transformation, but as a project manager. They explained that they were transitioning from traditional waterfall project management to Agile methodology, and they needed someone who could bridge both approaches during the transition. What they really wanted was someone to implement Scrum ceremonies while maintaining traditional project controls and reporting structures. They wanted me to run sprints, but also create detailed project plans with dependencies and critical paths. They wanted me to facilitate retrospectives, but also conduct performance evaluation. They wanted me to coach the team on Agile principles, while simultaneously forcing traditional project management processes that contradicted those principles. During the interview, they kept saying things like, we want to be Agile, but we still need predictability. Or they'll say something like, we love the idea of self-organizing teams where they get to govern themselves, but someone needs to make sure deadlines are met. Every statement was this contradiction between Agile values and traditional control enhancement. I realized they wanted speed and flexibility. They wanted the speed and flexibility of Agile with the certainty and control of waterfall project management. But those approaches have fundamentally different philosophies about planning, controlling, and team autonomy. You can't really have both without creating the exact role confusion that I experienced in the past. It kind of felt like they wanted an Agile coach to lead the transformation. Because as a project manager, the transformation is a project. Right? We can make this whole transformation of us changing from one to another. We can make that a project in itself that we can track with predictability. But once that project where we make sure everyone is trained and understands how things work and how we're going to move forward and what that process looks like, once we get to the other end of this project, we got to let go of the traditional PM stuff. But it's your company. You really could do whatever you want to do. But understand, when you're reaching out to professionals to come in and do the work, they're going to look at you crazy. These experiences taught me several important lessons. First, always ask specific questions in the interviews about what the role actually entails in the day-to-day. Don't assume that a Scrum Master title means that you'll be doing traditional Scrum Master work. And I will say that you will see jobs out there that now specifically say project manager / Scrum Master. I've always felt as if they want someone that had experience in both titles, but understand the water is going to get murky when they try to blend the two. Second, I learned to embrace the hybrid nature of these roles while being clear about the trade-offs. I'd explain to leadership that certain requests conflict with Agile principles, but I still execute what they needed. A good example of this is when I had an opportunity to work as a marketing project manager, and the way that the company was set up, all the projects went through this long, tedious, predictable waterfall project management approach. And though that made sense for certain projects, specifically the larger one, it really wasn't the best method for the bulk of the projects. Insert Agile, Scrum, and sprints. We came up with this way where we can differentiate between which projects are going to fall under the traditional project management and which projects are going to go through this Agile Scrum experience. That was a project in itself, doing that shift. But at the other end of it, at the end of this project experience, now we started to have happier stakeholders, happier teams, because the way that we customized or created this hybrid environment worked. We weren't asking you to use your project manager and Scrum Master brain in one project. We were saying, hey, these projects, turn that traditional PM brain on, while in these projects, I'm going to need you to put your Scrum Master hat. Third, I documented everything that I was actually doing so I could accurately represent my experience in future interviews and on my resume. I wasn't just a Scrum Master. I was doing project management, product ownership, and team leadership. So that means if when I applied for this job and I secured the role and it was project manager, and once I start working, I found myself as a Scrum Master or any of the other roles, business analyst, solutions architect, I'm gonna pull those titles and pull those roles so I can make sure that it's on my resume and I can speak to it when I'm in an interview. We're not leaving money on the table. Finally, I realized these experiences actually made me a more versatile professional. I understand both Agile and traditional project management, and I can work in environments that blend both methodologies. Not saying it's going to be easy, but I can speak to what I actually did in these interviews. And so it's not as scary as it may sound, because the different environments I've been in have allowed me to pretty much know how to survive in the wild. If you find yourself in a similar situation, here's my advice. Don't quit immediately just because the role isn't textbook perfect. These hybrid roles can provide valuable experience and skills that make you more marketable. Be transparent about what you're actually doing when networking or interviewing for future roles. Don't just say, I was a Scrum Master. Explain the full scope of your responsibility. Use these experiences to position yourself as someone who can bridge the gap between Agile and traditional project management approaches. That's actually a valuable skill in today's market. And most importantly, don't let role confusion make you feel like you're not doing real Scrum Master work. Many companies are still figuring out how to implement Agile practices, and being part of that journey gives you unique insights. So, have you been in a similar situation where your role title didn't match your actual responsibilities? Share your experience in the comments. The gap between methodology and reality is common across many PM roles, not just Scrum Master positions. The key is adapting while understanding the principles behind both approaches. Now, if you're looking for a project management community where you can get resources, career advice, and network with some amazing professionals, be sure to join our Discord, where I share all types of opportunities for those that are trying to get into the industry and those that are well-versed and considered vets in the game. I also provide job opportunities. I post daily jobs that I find in the US and international, as well as internships in the US. And most recently, I added this new section where I post transitional roles. So those roles where they help you transition or pivot into project management just a little easier. Follow me at Lola the Manager on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram for career updates or just to keep up with the kid. And next week, I'm starting our Tech Team Players series, where I'm breaking down the different roles you'll collaborate with as a PM. First up, business analysts, solutions architects, and implementation consultants. It's gonna get spicy. And I can't end this episode without saying thank you for watching and being part of this community. You can be anywhere in the world right now, but you're here getting professional development with me, and I love you for that. Stay connected, stay great, and stay blessed. Until next time.